Imagine a place where danger lurks behind every corner, where bikers aren't just riding for fun, they're riding for blood. This is the twisted world of Wayne Coleston, a man whose violent reputation left a trail of chaos. He was no ordinary criminal. Think outlaw biker gangs, drugs, weapons, and a mind driven by paranoia and rage. But what happens when someone like Coleston goes too far? When ambition and betrayal spiral out of control? Well, the story gets messy and deadly. Today we're diving into the dark, violent world of Coleston, the infamous Shedden Massacre, and how a seemingly normal farm became the setting for one of the most chilling moments in Canadian history. Trust me, this one's not for the faint-hearted. Let's get into it. In 2000, Wayne Coleston was standing on the edge of something dangerous. A man with a history of crime, violence, and biker gang ties, he was about to cross a line that would turn him into one of Canada's most notorious figures. Born in Ontario, Kellestine wasn't new to the rough side of life. His world was filled with drugs, violence, and a deep sense of loyalty to the outlaw biker lifestyle. Kellestine's rise to infamy began when he linked up with biker gangs in the 1990s, a decade that saw Canada's streets filled with gang wars and rivalries. He quickly became known for his violent nature and unflinching loyalty, climbing the ranks in the underworld with ease, first joining the Loners Motorcycle Club, then later running his own crew. Kellestine's gang wasn't just another small-time operation. They were ruthless, and they wanted more: money, power, and control. By the time Kellestine's gang came into direct conflict with the Hells Angels, one of the most feared groups in the biker world, he had already made a name for himself. But it was a violent clash in 1999 that pushed him further into the spotlight. After surviving a failed assassination attempt, Kellestine was arrested, and authorities found a staggering arsenal of weapons on his farm: 40 guns, a rocket launcher, and enough ammo to fuel a war. But despite his arrest, this didn't slow him down. In fact, it set the stage for the next chapter in his criminal empire. Kellestine was not the type of man who stayed idle. In prison, he wasn't just biding time. He was plotting, carefully laying the groundwork for his future. He had a dangerous mindset, a mix of paranoia, narcissism, and delusion. He believed he was invincible, untouchable, and willing to take out anyone who stood in his way. His reputation grew, and soon more blood would be spilled. The millionaire businessman, Salvatore Vecchio, was found dead. And the prime suspect? Kellestine. Vecchio, with his shady ties to the mafia and illegal operations, wasn't an angel. But the way Kellestine's name was being tossed around in connection to the murder made it clear that he had become a force to be reckoned with. But even more dangerous than his growing criminal profile was his relationship with the Hells Angels. They recognized Kellestine's ambition and violence, offering him a place within their ranks. But Kellestine, ever the rebel, rejected their offer, choosing instead to carve his own bloody path. Little did anyone know, this decision would eventually lead to one of the most horrifying massacres Canada had ever seen. After his release from prison in 2002, Wayne Coleston found himself in a strange position. He was now free, but his empire had crumbled. His former protege, Moussa Dir, was now the president of the Canadian Bandidos, a rival biker gang. The old connections Kellestine had relied on were slipping away. Some journalists even remarked that Kellestine's former allies had cut the strings, leaving him to fend for himself. Tensions quickly escalated. Moussa Dir, who was known for his more peaceful approach, began to steer the Bandidos toward a more controlled, less violent direction. He banned the use of meth, which was a significant blow to Kellestine and others who had been using meth trafficking to fund their operations. Kellestine, who had his own financial struggles, wasn't happy with Moussa Dir's decision. But more than that, he felt betrayed. Kellestine, always driven by his desire for power and wealth, couldn't stand the direction the Canadian Bandidos were heading. He felt that Moussa Dir was too soft, too concerned with being reasonable when the gang needed to be ruthless to survive. He wasn't interested in playing by anyone's rules, especially not Moussa Dir's. Kellestine's anger wasn't just personal. It was about money. The Canadian Bandidos weren't making enough of it, and Kellestine was determined to turn things around, no matter the cost. In December 2005, the American headquarters of the Bandidos gang made a shocking decision. They disowned the Canadian chapter. The Canadian members, including Kellestine, were no longer part of the infamous Bandidos gang. The Canadian faction, now desperate, rebranded as the No Surrender Crew. But there was a problem. Despite the disbanding, many members still proudly wore their Bandidos patches, which caught the attention of American leadership. The American Bandidos had to act. They knew Kellestine's crew would never back down without a fight. So, in March 2006, they summoned Kellestine and another disgruntled member, Sandom, to a neutral meeting place, Peace Arch Park, located on the border between Canada and the US. For bikers like them, who had criminal records, this park was a safe zone to talk without crossing any borders. At that meeting, the American leadership made Kellestine an offer. If he could pull the Bandidos patches off the No Surrender Crew, he would be reinstated as the president of the Canadian chapter. If he failed, well, he would be completely expelled, and his career in the gang world would be over for good. With his back against the wall, Kellestine agreed, knowing the stakes were higher than ever. But this wasn't going to be a peaceful takeover. Kellestine and Sandom were both armed and ready for war. They spent days planning the operation at Kellestine's farm, which was stocked with enough weapons to start a small battle. The goal? Take out Musadir and his crew, one way or another. The tension was palpable, and the idea of pulling the patches off the No Surrender Crew quickly escalated into a plan to eliminate them entirely. Kellestine's deep-seated rage began to take over. The former Bandidos president now had nothing left to lose, and with Sandom feeding his paranoia, it seemed like nothing could stop the bloodshed that was about to unfold. The plan was set into motion in April 2006. Kellestine had one goal in mind: eliminate Musadir and his No Surrender Crew. To do this, he needed to create a situation where he could accuse them of something, anything, to justify their execution. Kellestine came up with a plan that was as twisted as it was deadly. He accused Flans, one of Musadir's closest members, of being a police informant. It wasn't true, but Kellestine needed a reason to lure the No Surrender Crew to his farm. Musadir, who knew Kellestine's history and eccentric behavior, didn't take the accusation seriously, but reluctantly agreed to meet at Kellestine's farm to discuss the situation. What Musadir didn't know was that Kellestine had already decided that this meeting would be his crew's last. Kellestine made sure to send his wife and daughter away from the farm before the meeting, knowing that things were about to get violent. When the No Surrender Crew arrived that evening, they immediately felt the tension in the air. The barn where the meeting was supposed to take place was decorated with provocative images and Nazi memorabilia. Nothing about it screamed, "safe." Still, they entered, unaware of the deadly plan unfolding. It didn't take long for the violence to erupt. Luis Raposo, a member of the No Surrender Crew, was the first to make a move. He saw Sandom up in the rafters with a rifle and, sensing danger, fired a shot. Fortunately for Sandom, his bulletproof vest saved him, but that was all it took to set the bloody chain of events in motion. Sandom, despite being hit, managed to regain control and returned fire, killing Raposo. The other members of the No Surrender Crew scrambled to escape the chaos, but they were trapped. Two members, Sinopoli and Kryarakis, tried to run but were shot by Kellestine as they fled. The rest of the crew was quickly taken hostage. For hours, Kellestine and Sandom kept the crew prisoners, taunting them and debating their fate. Kellestine, drunk and increasingly unstable, began to revel in his power. He made Musadir call his girlfriend to prove that he was still in control. Musadir, following the unwritten code of bikers, didn't ask for help. He simply asked how their baby was doing. As the night dragged on, Kellestine grew more violent. He began to strike Flans, using his handgun to pistol whip him repeatedly, while spewing hateful comments. His madness escalated, and he made it clear that he was determined to wipe out the entire No Surrender Crew. Musadir, realizing that the situation was rapidly spinning out of control, tried to make a deal. He offered to join Kellestine if it meant saving his life. But Kellestine wasn't interested in deals. He was out for blood. With no hesitation, Kellestine led Musadir outside and shot him point blank in the head and chest. The rest of the crew followed in quick succession. Each member was marched outside, shot, and left to die in their vehicles. The process became disturbingly routine, a chilling execution assembly line. Sinopoli and Kryarakis were among the last to be killed. Sinopoli's screams echoed in the night as he begged for his life. His pleas were ignored, But the most surprising part was that Sinopoli survived the first shot when Kellestine's gun jammed. Only when he was given a new weapon did Kellestine finish him off. As the night went on, the bodies piled up. Musadir was dead. Raposo was dead. Sinopoli, Krairakis, and others met the same brutal end. Kellestine had made sure that no one would leave that farm alive. After the killings, the bloodshed wasn't over yet. The remaining members of the No Surrender crew, Flans and Little Mikey, were forced to clean up the mess. As they struggled to wipe away the blood of their fallen comrades, Kellestine took twisted pleasure in tormenting them. He made cruel comments, taunting them about how the dead crew members should be thanking him for sending them to their graves. Little Mikey was killed next. His fate was sealed, and Kellestine wasted no time in finishing him off. Flans, however, wasn't so lucky. Kellestine, heavily drunk by now, couldn't finish the job. Instead, he handed the gun to Sandom, who had already begun to crack under the pressure of what was happening. But Sandom was too rattled to do what was needed. He hesitated, unable to kill Flans despite being inches away. Blaming the jammed gun, Sandom handed it to Musadir's old ally, Mushi, who had no such qualms. With ruthless efficiency, Mushi finished off Flans. It was a horrifying moment, one that sealed the fate of every single member of the No Surrender crew. But Kellestine wasn't done. He knew the bodies couldn't stay where they were. The police would eventually come looking, and the bodies had to disappear. So, they piled them into their vehicles, planning to dump them far away in Kitchener, one of the Hells Angels' strongholds, hoping the police might blame them instead. Things didn't go as planned. On the way to Kitchener, one of the vehicles started running low on gas. Rather than risk getting caught, they decided to ditch the plan and instead dump the bodies and vehicles at a nearby farm. To cover their tracks, they set the cars and bodies on fire. It seemed like a decent backup plan, except they hadn't counted on the police coming down hard on them soon after. As expected, the authorities launched a full investigation, and soon, everything started to unravel. The police discovered burned keys from the victims' apartments, along with a half-burned business card belonging to Flans. Then, they made a chilling find: 18 guns hidden on Kellestine's property. Among these, some were confirmed to be the murder weapons used that night. They also noticed the floor of the barn had been soaked in hydrochloric acid, a clear indication that Kellestine had been prepared for the cleanup. The trail was too obvious to ignore, and with the evidence mounting, the police arrested Kellestine, Sandom, and the others. It wasn't long before the case reached court. The brutality of the murders shocked everyone, and the press couldn't get enough of the gruesome details. Kellestine, always the showman, couldn't resist giving reporters the middle finger during his trial, further cementing his notoriety. The trial was one thing, but Kellestine knew there was no escaping what he had done. The police had everything they needed to convict him. As the investigation wrapped up, one last chilling detail came to light. Kellestine had made sure to call a couple of his friends to help him destroy the remaining evidence after the murders. They had even come up with a fake alibi, claiming they had been drinking beer with him that night, just to cover their tracks. But the law was relentless. In May 2006, police launched a full forensic sweep of Kellestine's farm. They discovered an overwhelming amount of incriminating evidence: burned apartment keys, business cards, guns, and traces of hydrochloric acid. Everything pointed back to him. Soon after, the trial began. The media, of course, was all over it. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators. Kellestine, never one to miss a chance to act out, gave them the middle finger and even swore at the courtroom artists during the proceedings. He clearly didn't care about anything anymore, except maybe his twisted version of control. The jury delivered its verdict in October 2009. Kellestine was found guilty of 44 counts of first-degree murder, an astounding number that still stands as one of the highest ever recorded in a single criminal case in Canada. Alongside his convictions, there were several other manslaughter charges. Kellestine was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole. Today, Kellestine is still behind bars, his life marked by the brutality he left behind. His farm, once the site of unimaginable horror, still stands. But it's a place that no one really wants to visit. In fact, it's considered one of the creepiest spots near Lorna Station. A local journalist described it perfectly. From a few hundred meters away, the crime scene looks like any other rural property in Ontario. But up close, it feels decidedly more sinister. Wayne Coleston's story is one of power, betrayal, and a blood-soaked path that led him from being a respected figure to a notorious criminal. His brutal rise and equally savage fall serve as a chilling reminder of just how far people can go when they're consumed by ambition and vengeance. The Shedden Massacre left a scar not only on the victims' families, but also on the entire biker community. For Kellestine, there is no redemption, no second chance. His life in prison is one of solitude and regret, if he's capable of feeling it at all. In the end, it's a story of crime, violence, and the consequences of crossing the line in such a brutal way. As chilling as it is, it's a story that reminds us that not everyone who walks this earth deserves the title of brother, no matter how deep their bonds may seem.